What made a quiet cowboy chase the woman the whole frontier had already judged? And why did he believe she was worth risking everything for? A carpetbag bursts open across the frozen road. A Bible slides into the dust. Hooves thud against the hard ground as a ranch gate creaks in the wind. The young woman struggles to stand, favoring one aching leg, while a silent cowboy stops a few steps away and studies her without a word. Then he asks a single unexpected question. "Why? Stay with us and tell us where you're watching from." The accusation reached the boarding house before Lydia Carver did. By the time she climbed the narrow stairs that evening, dragging her left foot after a 12-hour shift, her room had already been searched. Her dresses lay across the bed. Her Bible was open face down on the floor. The small tin box that held $3.16 sat empty beside the wash basin. Mrs. S. Henley waited in the doorway with Robert behind her. "You will leave tonight," she said. Lydia looked at Robert. A pale scratch crossed his cheek where she had pushed him away in the pantry that morning. He would not meet her eyes. "I stole nothing," Lydia said. Mrs. Henley held up a silver brooch. "Robert found this beneath your mattress." Lydia knew the brooch. She had polished it every Thursday for nearly 2 years. She also knew there was nothing she could say that would matter. Robert had a family name, good boots, and an aunt who believed him. Lydia had a worn brown dress, a damaged leg, and no one willing to stand beside her. She gathered what remained into her carpetbag. Mrs. Henley watched as though even the cracked comb and mended stockings might belong to someone else. Outside, rain tapped against the hitching rail. Robert followed her onto the porch. "You should have been kinder to me," he murmured. Lydia tightened her hand around the bag handle and walked away without answering. By morning, his version of the story had crossed half the county. At the bakery, the owner turned the sign to closed when he saw her coming. The liveryman refused to sell her a seat on the westbound coach. At the general store, 2 women stopped speaking as Lydia entered, then stared at her until she left empty-handed. She spent her final nickel on a heel of bread and sat beneath the depot awning while wagons rattled through the mud. That was where she found the advertisement. It had been folded into an old newspaper left on the bench. Brick Ranch, Silver Ridge, household help wanted, room, meals, and fair wages, honest work for an honest person. The notice was nearly 3 weeks old. Silver Ridge lay 57 miles northwest, beyond the foothills and the swollen crossings of Beaver Creek. Lydia read the advertisement 4 times before folding it into the inner pocket of her coat. She left before noon. The first 12 miles followed a wagon road cut through yellow grass. By sunset, the rain had soaked through her hat and gathered cold beneath her collar. Her injured leg burned with every step, but stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant hearing Robert's voice again. On the second day, a freight wagon carried her as far as Miller's Crossing. The driver said little. When he noticed her limp, he slowed the team on the steep grades without making a show of it. After that, she walked alone. She crossed Beaver Creek with her skirts tied above her knees, one hand gripping a cottonwood branch while brown water shoved against her boots. On the far bank, she sat trembling among the stones until feeling returned to her fingers. That night, she slept beneath an abandoned hayshed. Coyotes called from the dark hills. Wind worried the loose boards above her. Lydia held the carpetbag beneath her head and kept one hand over the newspaper in her coat, as though the few printed lines might disappear before morning. On the 4th afternoon, the mountains opened into a wide valley. Silver Ridge appeared below her in pieces. A church steeple, a line of false front buildings, smoke rising from chimneys, and ranch fences stretching toward the blue-gray foothills. A passing drover pointed her toward Brick Ranch. 3 miles north, he said. Then his gaze rested on her muddy hem and exhausted face. Road gets steep near the cottonwoods. The sun was dropping when Lydia reached the ranch gate. The words Brick Ranch had been burned into a heavy plank above it. Beyond the fence stood a weathered house, a red barn, 2 corrals, and a windmill turning slowly against a copper sky. She made it halfway up the lane before her bad leg folded. The carpetbag struck the ground. Its brass clasp sprang open, spilling a stocking, a spoon, and her Bible into the dust. Bootsteps approached. Lydia tried to rise, but pain flashed through her hip. A tall man stopped several feet away. He wore a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms, work gloves tucked into his belt, and dust along the brim of his hat. His face was lean, sun-browned, and unreadable. He glanced at the scattered belongings, then at Lydia. "You came about the notice?" She nodded. His eyes moved briefly to her left leg. There was no pity in them, no quick judgment either. "The notice said honest work," she said. "I can cook, mend, keep accounts, and manage a house. I may be slower at some things, but I finish what I begin." The man crouched and picked up her Bible. He brushed dust from its cover before placing it carefully inside the bag. "I'm Elias Brick." "Lydia Carver." He closed the clasp and stood. She waited for the questions. Where had she worked? Why had she left? What had people said about her? Instead, Elias looked toward this house, where lamplight had begun to glow behind the kitchen window. "Have you eaten today?" Lydia lowered her eyes. "Some bread this morning." "That wasn't what I asked." For the first time in 4 days, something inside her loosened. "No," she admitted. Elias lifted her carpetbag. "Supper's on the stove." He did not offer his arm. He simply shortened his stride and walked beside her slowly enough that she did not have to ask. From the barn doorway, a younger man watched them approach. Farther down the road, a wagon rolled past the ranch gate, then slowed. The driver turned for a longer look. Before Lydia had reached the porch, Silver Ridge had already begun to wonder why Elias Brick had welcomed her inside. The younger man at the barn was Holden Brick. He was 17, broad-shouldered but not yet filled out, with a cowlick that refused to stay beneath his hat. He came forward at once, then stopped when he noticed Lydia leaning harder on her right leg. "Want me to fetch Dr. Hale?" "No," Lydia said quickly. "I only need a chair." Holden brought one from the kitchen before Elias could answer. Supper was beef stew, biscuits, and coffee strong enough to leave a bitter edge on the tongue. Elias sat at the end of the pine table. Holden talked enough for both brothers, explaining which mare kicked, which fence leaned, and why the kitchen stove smoked whenever the wind came from the east. Lydia listened with both hands wrapped around her cup. No one asked why she had arrived alone. That silence felt strange, almost dangerous. The next morning, she woke before dawn in a small upstairs room with a narrow iron bed, a washstand, and curtains faded by years of Montana sun. Her leg had stiffened badly during the night, but she dressed before anyone stirred. By 6, biscuits were rising in the oven. By 7, she had found the missing sugar ledger beneath a stack of feed receipts. By noon, the pantry shelves were cleared, scrubbed, and arranged so flour, beans, salt, and lamp oil could be counted without opening every sack. Holden stared into the pantry. Elias has been looking for that coffee tin since spring. It was behind the vinegar crock. He said Wade Cooper borrowed it. From the doorway, Elias said, "Wade borrows plenty." A hint of amusement touched his voice. Lydia looked up. Elias was watching her, but when their eyes met, he reached for the tin instead. The work settled around her. She patched Holden's torn shirt with close, even stitches. She boiled cracked harness buckles in vinegar before Elias carried them to the workbench. She copied cattle purchases into the ranch ledger using a careful hand that made the figures easier to read. Her leg slowed her on the stairs, though she tried to hide it. 3 days after her arrival, the loose porch board no longer shifted beneath her boot. A week later, the heavy flour barrel had been moved from the floor to a waist-high stand. Then a low wooden stool appeared beside the kitchen table, built from planed pine with a crosspiece placed exactly where her left foot could rest. Lydia found Elias repairing a bridle in the barn. "You made the stool." He pulled a leather strap through the buckle. "We needed one." "We did not." His hands paused. "The kitchen did." She almost smiled. "Thank you." Elias nodded once and returned to the bridle, but his ears had gone slightly red beneath the shadow of his hat. Holden noticed everything. He never teased his brother directly. Instead, he began leaving Lydia reasons to join them outside. A torn glove that needed mending, a coffee cup forgotten near the corral, a question about feed accounts he already knew how to answer. By late August, Lydia could identify every horse by its footsteps against the yard. She knew Elias drank coffee black before sunrise and added sugar after a hard day. She knew Holden whistled when nervous. She knew the house settled at night with 3 soft knocks from the west wall. And she knew Elias sometimes stood on the porch after supper, looking toward the mountains as though waiting for someone who had never returned. One evening, he found her carrying a basket of folded laundry. "I can take that. I have it." "I know." He took half. They crossed the yard together beneath a sky turning violet above the foothills. Neither spoke. The basket was light between them, but Lydia felt each step as if the ground had changed. In September, Martha Collins arrived in a gray wagon with 6 jars of peaches covered in waxed cloth. She was a widow from the neighboring spread, small and straight-backed, with silver hair pinned under a black bonnet. She examined the scrubbed porch, the repaired curtains, and the clean window glass. "You've brought this house back to life," she told Lydia. Lydia glanced toward Elias. It only needed tending. Martha's eyes moved between them. Most things do. At the Silver Ridge trading post the following Saturday, Martha repeated the compliment within hearing of half the town. Some people nodded, others lowered their voices. Lydia stood at the counter counting coins for thread, soap, and coffee. She felt the glances but kept her attention on the receipt. Then the bell above the door rang. 2 freight men entered, shaking road dust from their coats. One of them looked at Lydia twice. "I know you," he said. The room went still. He turned toward the others. "That's the Carver woman from east of Miller's Crossing." Lydia's fingers tightened around the paper receipt. The second man frowned. "The one who robbed her employer?" No one answered. Across the store, Elias set down a sack of nails. The sound was quiet. Still, every face turned toward him. Lydia waited for the old pattern to begin, for suspicion, questions, and the careful distance people placed between themselves and shame. Elias walked to the counter. He picked up the sack of coffee and Lydia's parcel of thread. "We finished here?" he asked her. She searched his face. "Yes." He held the door open. Outside, wagon wheels creaked along the main road. A church bell struck 3 times in the cold September air. Lydia stepped onto the boardwalk beside him. Behind them, the freight men began talking again. This time, the rumor had reached Brick Ranch, and it had arrived carrying her name. For several days, no one mentioned what had happened at the trading post. Elias worked the north pasture from dawn until the light thinned over the ridge. Holden repaired harness in the barn. Lydia kept the stove fed, balanced the September accounts, and folded the freight receipt into the back of the ledger. Still, the silence followed her from room to room. At supper, Holden spoke too brightly about a calf born near the creek. Elias asked for more coffee without looking up. Lydia heard the carefulness in both of them. On the 4th morning, she found Elias replacing the latch on the back gate. "You can ask me," she said. He tested the hinge once. "Ask what?" "Whether the story is true." Elias set down the screwdriver. The yard was still except for the windmill clicking above them. "Did you steal from Mrs. Henley?" "No." "Then I have my answer." Lydia stared at him. "You do not know me well enough for that. I know the work you do. I know how you treat Holden. I know you put back every penny left on the kitchen shelf. His voice remained quiet. That is more than I know about the men telling the story. Before Lydia could answer, Holden called from the corral. A gray stallion had broken through the inner rail. The horse was half wild, recently traded from a ranch beyond Helena. Rain-dark clouds were stacking over the mountains, and the animal had begun circling hard, striking the ground and tossing foam from the bit. "Leave him!" Elias shouted. But Holden had already climbed the fence. He'll smash himself against the posts. The first thunder rolled before Elias reached the gate. The stallion wheeled. Holden caught the reins for 1 second. Then the horse jerked free and threw him sideways into the packed earth. Everything seemed to stop. Then Lydia heard herself shouting his name. Elias reached him first. Holden lay still near the water trough, his hat several feet away. Rain came suddenly, hard enough to rattle the barn roof. "Get blankets," Elias said. Lydia was already moving. They carried Holden into the house and laid him on the long table. His breathing came shallow and uneven. One side of his face had gone pale beneath the dust. Elias reached for his coat. "I'll ride for Hale. The creek will be over the road. I'll find a way. You may not come back before dark." He turned toward her, anger and fear fighting in his eyes. "What do you suggest?" Lydia placed 2 fingers against Holden's neck. Years earlier, before Mrs. Henley, she had worked in a rail camp kitchen where accidents came without warning. She had watched an older nurse keep injured men alive until the doctor arrived. "Send Wade Cooper from the South Trail," she said. "His mare knows the high crossing. Then help me move Holden upstairs." The storm closed over Brick Ranch before noon. Dr. Hale could not reach them. Lydia stayed beside Holden through the long gray afternoon. She kept him warm, watched his breathing, and stopped Elias from forcing water between his lips when he could not swallow properly. "Small sips when he wakes," she said. "Not before." Elias obeyed. That frightened her more than if he had argued. By night, the lamps burned low. Rain drummed against the windows. Holden had not opened his eyes. Elias sat on the floor beside the bed, elbows on his knees. "You should rest," Lydia whispered. "So should you." She adjusted the folded cloth beneath Holden's head. Neither moved. Near midnight, Holden's breathing changed. Lydia leaned close. His fingers twitched against the quilt. "Holden?" His eyelids opened only a fraction. "Coffee," he murmured. A sound escaped Elias that was almost a laugh and almost something else. Lydia lowered her head for one brief moment. When she looked up, Elias was watching her. Not with gratitude alone, something deeper had entered the silence between them. Dr. Benjamin Hale arrived after sunrise, soaked to the shoulders and carrying a black medical case tied behind his saddle. He examined Holden for nearly an hour. At last, he came downstairs and warmed his hands around a tin cup. "He'll mend," the doctor said. "Bruised ribs, a hard knock to the head. He needs quiet and watching." Elias looked toward Lydia. Dr. Hale followed his gaze. "She did right by him," he said. "Better than most would have. Had she waited for me, you might be arranging a burial." The words settled heavily in the kitchen. Holden recovered slowly over the next 2 weeks. Martha Collins brought broth. Wade Cooper repaired the broken corral rail without charging a cent. Even people who had whispered at the trading post began speaking of Lydia differently. Then, one cold afternoon in early October, a hired carriage stopped outside the Silver Ridge Church. A man stepped down wearing a fine black coat and polished boots unsuited to the muddy road. Robert Henley carried a leather document case beneath one arm. Inside it were 2 signed letters, a list of missing valuables, and a statement bearing Mrs. Henley's seal. By sundown, every table at the trading post had heard his claim. Lydia Carver had not come to Silver Ridge for work, he said. She had come there to hide. By the following morning, Robert Henley's words had spread farther than the autumn wind. Men paused beside wagons outside the trading post. Women lowered their voices after church. Every conversation seemed to stop a moment too soon whenever Lydia appeared. She noticed. She always noticed. At Brick Ranch, nothing changed on the surface. The coffee still boiled before sunrise. The chickens still wandered across the yard. Holden's strength returned little by little, and each afternoon he managed another careful walk from the porch to the barn. But silence had settled into the house. Not the comfortable silence Lydia had grown to love. A different one. The kind that waited for something to break. Late one afternoon, Elias found a folded paper tucked beneath the ranch gate. It bore Sheriff Amos Turner's seal. There would be a public meeting after Sunday's church service. Robert Henley had requested that his accusations be heard before witnesses. Lydia stood at the kitchen window while Elias read the notice. "I'll leave before Sunday," she said quietly. He folded the paper once. "No. They'll stop talking if I'm gone. They'll only find someone else to talk about. I've caused enough trouble." Elias looked at her for a long moment. "You didn't bring the trouble." His voice never rose. "It followed you." Sunday arrived beneath a pale October sky. Wagons filled the churchyard long before the bell rang. After the service ended, people remained instead of heading home. Sheriff Amos Turner stood near the front steps with his notebook. Robert Henley waited beside him, dressed as neatly as though attending a wedding instead of accusing someone. Mrs. Henley's signed statement rested inside his leather case. Lydia remained near the back of the gathering. She wished she could disappear into the cottonwoods beyond the cemetery fence. Robert began confidently. He repeated every accusation. The missing brooch, the stolen money, the lies, the false respectability. When he finished, Sheriff Turner closed his notebook. "You've made serious claims." Robert straightened. "I have proof." "You have statements." Robert frowned. "They're the same thing." "No." The sheriff's answer came calmly. "They aren't." He asked Robert simple questions. When had the brooch first disappeared? Who searched Lydia's room? Who besides Mrs. Henley actually saw her steal anything? Robert's certainty began to thin. His answers shifted. One date became another. One witness had suddenly been absent. One detail no longer matched the written statement. People exchanged quiet glances. Then Reverend Samuel Brooks stepped forward. "I visited Mrs. Henley the morning after Miss Carver left." Robert turned sharply. The minister continued. "She told me she'd never personally seen Lydia steal so much as a spoon." Robert interrupted. "She believed me." "That," Reverend Brooks replied gently, "is different." Martha Collins removed her gloves. "I've watched Lydia these past weeks." Everyone looked toward the elderly widow. "She's balanced Elias's accounts to the penny." She held up a folded receipt. "When I overpaid for flour, she rode 2 miles to return 38 cents. A faint murmur passed through the crowd. Martha smiled sadly. "That doesn't sound like someone hiding stolen silver." Robert's face reddened. "She's fooled all of you." Dr. Benjamin Hale stepped beside Elias. "I've treated folks in this valley for 20 years. He nodded toward Lydia. When Holden Brick needed steady hands, she never once asked what she'd be paid. His eyes rested on Robert. Character usually shows itself when no one's watching. For the first time since the meeting began, Elias spoke. Only one sentence. "If you're calling her a thief," he met Robert's eyes. "Prove it." Nothing moved. Even the breeze seemed to stop among the yellow cottonwood leaves. Robert opened his case. He searched through the papers, read one, then another. Each looked less convincing than before. Sheriff Turner quietly closed the leather case himself. "I've heard enough." Robert stared in disbelief. "You can't simply dismiss this." "I haven't dismissed it." The sheriff handed the papers back. "I've found no evidence." The meeting slowly dissolved. Neighbors drifted toward their wagons. Some nodded politely to Lydia. Others looked embarrassed. No one apologized. They simply left. The walk back to Brick Ranch felt longer than any road Lydia had traveled before. Holden spoke happily about putting the matter behind them. Dr. Hale promised to stop by later in the week. Martha squeezed Lydia's hand before climbing into her wagon. Only Lydia remained quiet. That evening, she washed the supper dishes twice before realizing they were already clean. She folded towels that needed no folding. Long after the lamps had been extinguished, she sat beside the upstairs window watching moonlight settle across the pasture. Justice had come, but peace had not. She knew too well how quickly people believed the worst. One meeting could not erase years of whispers. Near midnight, she lit a small oil lamp. She wrote only a few lines. "Thank you for believing me before I could believe myself. For giving me a home when I had none. Please don't come after me. Brick Ranch deserves quiet again." She signed her name carefully. Lydia Carver. Before dawn, she packed the same carpetbag that had arrived dusty and half-empty months before. She paused beside Holden's room. His breathing was steady. Then she stopped outside Elias's bedroom door. One hand rested lightly against the weathered wood. She almost knocked. Instead, she whispered something only the sleeping house could hear. "I'm sorry." Outside, frost silvered the grass. She slipped through the front gate just as the eastern sky began turning pale. The porch stood empty behind her. Only after the sound of her footsteps disappeared into the morning road did Elias Brick open his bedroom door. The folded letter waited on the kitchen table beside his untouched cup of coffee. He read it once, then again. By the third time Holden had come downstairs, one hand braced against the wall. What happened? Elias folded the letter along the same crease Lydia had made. She left. Holden looked toward the empty peg where her coat had hung. For a moment, neither brother moved. Then Elias reached for his hat. Holden caught his sleeve. "The North Road? She'll take the stage trail through the pass. Your sorrel's already saddled." Elias glanced toward the window. Holden had understood before he asked. Frost covered the yard in a thin white skin. The sorrel stamped beside the hitching post, breath smoking in the dawn. Elias mounted without changing his shirt or fastening his coat all the way. He rode hard past the ranch gate. The road climbed beyond Silver Ridge, narrowing between granite slopes and stands of dark pine. Wagon ruts had frozen overnight. Loose stones snapped beneath the sorrel's hooves. He found Lydia 2 miles below the mountain pass. She was walking beside the road with the carpetbag in one hand and a broken branch in the other. Her left foot dragged more heavily than usual. Frost clung to the hem of her dress. Elias reined in several yards behind her. "Lydia," she stopped. Her shoulders rose once before she turned. "You should go back. So should you. I asked you not to come." I read that part. The wind moved between them, carrying the clean smell of pine and cold earth. Elias dismounted. Lydia watched him approach, but did not step closer. "The meeting is over," she said. "Robert's lies are known. You have nothing left to prove. This isn't about Robert. People will keep talking. They always do. You could lose business. I can buy fewer cattle. Elias." Her voice broke on his name. She looked away toward the mountains. "You deserve a quiet house. A wife who can ride all day, climb fences, bear children without every neighbor wondering whether she is strong enough. Someone who doesn't bring old trouble to your gate." Elias stood very still. "Is that what you think I want?" "It is what any sensible cowboy would want." "Then maybe I'm not sensible." She gave a small, wounded laugh. He did not smile. "I've watched you walk through pain every morning and still make breakfast before the rest of us wake. I've watched you turn a neglected house into a home without asking anyone to notice. You saved my brother. You kept my books straighter than I ever did. You returned 38 cents to Martha Collins because it wasn't yours." Lydia lowered her eyes. Those are ordinary things. Not to me. He stepped closer, leaving enough space for her to choose what happened next. They looked at your leg and decided what your life was worth. Robert looked at your silence and thought he could use it against you. Folks in town heard one story and forgot to ask whether it was true. His voice softened. I never saw what they saw. Lydia's grip tightened around the branch. What did you see? Elias hesitated. He had faced winter cattle drives, river crossings, and armed men without searching so long for words. A woman who kept going when most people would have sat down and stayed there. The morning sun touched the ridge behind her. A woman who makes Holden laugh when he has no business laughing. A woman whose coffee I miss before the cup is empty. A woman I listen for every time the front door opens. Lydia's eyes filled, but she did not look away. Elias removed his hat. They said no cowboy would marry you because they thought a man would only see what was wrong. He drew one quiet breath. I don't see anything wrong with you. The wind lifted a strand of hair across her cheek. He said the next words plainly, without flourish. You're perfect to me. Lydia closed her eyes. For several seconds, the only sound was the sorrel shifting behind him. When she opened them again, fear was still there. So was hope. You don't owe me this because I saved Holden. I know. You don't owe me because I worked at your ranch. I know that too. And I won't stay because I have nowhere else. Elias nodded. Then don't. The answer startled her. He set his hat back on. Come back because you choose to, or keep walking, and I'll take you safely to the stage stop. He held out his hand, palm open. No debt, no bargain, no pity. Lydia looked at his hand, then at the road ahead. Beyond the pass lay towns that did not know her, rooms she had not slept in, and work she might find if luck turned kindly. Behind her lay a red barn, a crooked windmill, Holden's whistle, a low kitchen stool, and a man who had shortened his stride without ever asking her to apologize for hers. She let the broken branch fall. Then she placed her hand in Elias's. They returned to Brick Ranch slowly. Holden stood at the gate wrapped in a quilt over his clothes. When he saw Lydia beside Elias, he tried to run and nearly stumbled. Lydia laughed through her tears. By spring, the valley had turned green again. Robert Henley's accusations were formally dismissed in Sheriff Turner's ledger. Mrs. Henley sent no apology, but Reverend Brooks received a letter admitting she had never witnessed Lydia steal anything. He read only the necessary portion before the congregation and folded the rest away. Silver Ridge changed in the quiet manner of frontier towns, not all at once. Martha Collins brought white lilacs for the wedding table. Dr. Hale stood beside Holden near the church steps. Wade Cooper repaired the brick ranch gate and refused payment. Elias and Lydia were married on a clear April afternoon. There was no grand procession. Only wagon bells, fresh bread, coffee and mismatched cups, and mountain light pouring through the church windows. That evening, Lydia stood on the brick ranch porch with Elias beside her. Her left leg still ached when the weather shifted. The porch board still creaked near the door. Holden was in the barn arguing with a mare. Nothing had become perfect. Yet Elias reached down and took her hand as the sun lowered behind the Montana peaks. This time, Lydia did not wonder how long she would be allowed to stay. She looked across the land, then toward the man beside her. And for the first time in her life, home was not a place someone had given her. It was a life she had chosen. Maybe that's why this story lingers long after the last sunset over Silver Ridge. Most of us know what it feels like to carry old wounds that other people can see before they ever notice our heart. We wonder whether we'll always be measured by our mistakes, our scars, or someone else's version of our story. Lydia discovered that healing didn't begin when the rumors stopped. It began when she found people who looked beyond them. Elias never tried to rescue her from her past. He simply stood beside her until she was strong enough to believe she deserved a future. Sometimes love isn't spoken through grand promises. Sometimes it's a slower thing. A cup of coffee waiting on the table, a steady hand offered without pressure, or the quiet courage to stay when leaving would be easier. If you had been standing in Lydia's boots on that mountain road, would you have kept walking? Or would you have turned back? I'd love to hear your answer in the comments. Thank you for sharing this journey with us. If stories about quiet courage, lasting love, second chances, and the healing spirit of the American frontier speak to your heart, I hope you'll join us again. There are many more unforgettable trails ahead, each carrying its own mystery, hope, and reminder that even the loneliest road can lead us home.